Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Asylum by Cressida.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
It has been a while since we've had an album which actually had quite a bit of favorite bits, and today's album is just that, so enjoy. It's gonna be like a minute of favorite bits, maybe even more. So here are some of my favorite bits from this album.
So afraid of how I'd fare. Now I can't really say I know, 'cause I've been there. Is it just the aura of everything combined? I waited all that morning, and I waited all the next, preparing for an interview by reading from the text.
Now, Cressida was founded back in 1968 in London in the UK. Now, they only released their first album in 1970, and despite really sounding proto-prog-ish, they wouldn't be considered as proto-prog because they did start and emerge and make their music whenever prog itself started being a thing. And the album we're looking at today, which is Asylum, is their second and last album in a really short discography. Now, it was released in 1971, 1 year after the band actually disbanded. The band members just didn't have it anymore. It didn't really work well for them. They didn't want to create music together, so each and everyone went his own way. But the Vertigo record label, they didn't want to let this album go, so they decided to release it nonetheless in 1971, and boy am I glad that they did. Now, I mentioned before that this album really feels like proto-prog, and to me at least it really does, because the main aspect of progressive rock doesn't really appear on it, and that's the rock part. This album takes a whole lot more inspiration from genres like jazz, blues, R&B, and even classical music. And add to all of that some great psychedelic undertones and you've got Asylum. And this album is actually structured in a kind of weird way in which it has two types of songs mostly. One are the really short songs, usually averaging at around 2 minutes of runtime, and then you have the longer tracks, usually averaging at around 10 minutes of runtime. There's only one track that doesn't really fall under any of these categories, and that's the song called Lisa with 5 minutes of runtime, which is pretty typical for a progressive rock song. So this album opens up with the title track of Asylum. Now, unlike what I would have expected, this isn't one of the longer pieces, the well explored pieces. This is actually a pretty short track with 3 minutes and a half of runtime, and this one does serve a great purpose for this album, giving us a great introduction to what we're gonna experience while listening to this entire piece as a whole. This album will offer us with some really great musicianship, some really great energies, a fantastic omnipresent Hammond organ, and the band which is playing really tightly, all led by the amazing vocals by the vocalist Angus Collin. And after we're introduced to all of these characteristics in Asylum, we are moving on to the next track, which is the bigger one, the wilder one called Munich. And this one is my undisputed favorite from this album. I don't think think that I couldn't think back then that anything from this album would top this one. It is purely fantastic and it has everything that I love about my progressive music. It has fast pacing shifts in music, a strong build up and a payoff. It has a lot of shifting time signatures, plenty of solos by Colin and the band, and it puts a great emphasis on such lovely instruments such as the string instruments like violins and cellos, but also the brass instruments like the trumpets. And I could honestly have created an entire review and an entire video about this track alone. It is so good. I've given it multiple listens since listening to it the first time today, so you know it's pretty good, but there's a lot of people that don't like this kind of music, but we'll get to it later. What I will have to say that for anyone who doesn't know this piece in particular, go ahead and listen to Munich right now. It will have been worth your time. And for those of you who do know this song and kind of forgot about it, please open up your favorite streaming software or your record collection and go ahead and listen to it. And then we move on from this monstrosity of a song into one of the shorter ones called Goodbye Post Office Tower Goodbye, which is definitely a darker track, but it still has really bright undertones to it, and it overall sounds like ska music. And Colin just does a great job leading this one off with his great vocals. He tells the story of a man who's taken a bomb to the post office he used to work at and he's gonna plant it there, and you know, mayhem is gonna ensue. And I just can't put more emphasis on how good the vocals by Colin are and how well they are matched with the music by Cressida. And this album continues to surprise with really neat shorter tracks all the way up to the end when we have the last song called Let Them Come When They Will. And this track I could only describe as being cool, but I don't just mean yeah it's cool, I mean like, you know, older brother cool. Like, yeah, I know that I'm creating great music, yeah, I know the music is so fantastic, yeah, so what about it? And I feel that on this one in particular, I think the band has really mastered the ability of taking two seemingly unrelated musical ideas and, you know, gluing them head to butt and just seeing how they work so harmoniously. I honestly really love all the songs that this album has to offer, but I can't help but think to myself what would have happened if they were actually focusing more on creating more longer pieces and not just a lot of shorter tracks. I think that this album with one or two bigger songs on here instead of the shorter ones would have just been so fantastic, and honestly I would love to hear something like that, but of course I don't see any reason why Cressida would release an album now. And although I myself really love this album, I read a lot of reviews finding this album to be distasteful, really disliking what it does. And my only reasoning for why people really don't like this album is because, at least in my opinion, this album can really show the middle finger to jazz but also kinda embrace it. And the mentality of Cressida of diversion from the traditional jazz music ethos is what probably makes this album so great, but also less likable to people that appreciate jazz for its traditional sound. But I really love their experimentation. I think that experimentation on jazz, blues, R&B and what they did on this album is definitely what led to the creation of prog. And as I said, this might not be a proto-prog album, but it definitely feels like one. I personally really love this one, and honestly I can't wait to listen to their first album, which is unfortunately not present on this year's list, but I've already added it for the reserve list for next year. Don't believe what Spotify tells you. This is the right cover for this album. Yeah, it's just something really odd that Spotify has the cover for the first album as also being the cover for their second album. And this cover overall is a pretty low effort cover. I kind of really like this one, but I can't really tell you why. I really like the idea of the styrofoam heads just being laid around the shore. You have something which is mildly disturbing about how it looks like it's some sort of cursed image. And then of course you have the clumbering of all the styrofoam heads all looking at their fallen comrade who is now burning on fire. Do I know what this cover has to do with the album itself? No, I don't. I have no idea, but it's really odd and it's really psychedelic in some way, in a way that only the Vertigo record label really knows how to produce. And when it comes to the rating of this album, this one definitely gets a rating of 9 out of 10. It isn't perfect, but it's definitely something I'm gonna come back to. It is so good. There are some great highlights on here, and honestly anything that has an Hammond organ on it just buys me right on the spot. But that's about it guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna take a look at yet another Vertigo label record, one from the early 70s if I'm not mistaken, and it's of course an Apple Day by the band Apple. I also want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Claim Wallenham, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.